Welcome into the PFF NFL Show. Steve Palazzolo back here with Sam Monson. And Sam, we're going to put our journalism hats on today.
Do you have a journalism hat?
I do.
Yeah?
I'm actually lying. Now we're on video. I can't lie. We used to be able to lie. I'd say I'm wearing it.
No, I don't mean like on your head right now.
Oh.
I mean generally. You have one sitting in the closet somewhere?
It's at home.
Yeah?
It's a bucket hat.
Because I at least have qualifications in journalism. I have a master's degree in journalism.
So you must have a hat.
Yeah,
they give you a hat?
They give you one at the completion of the course.
That's great. You're going to have to wear it for the next
But in order for you to have a journalism hat, you must have stolen it from somebody.
Look, I don't want to get into it, all right? Don't incriminate me.
Okay.
So we're going to put the journalism hat on. We're bringing in the great Peter King to just discuss some draft and just in general pick his brain, which will be a lot of fun. We're going to get to that right now, actually. So you ready?
Let's roll straight into it.
Let's bring him in. Let's bring in Peter King of MMQB/Sports Illustrated. All right, we are honored to have Mr. Peter King. Are you the godfather of NFL media, Peter? Is that? Are we allowed to say that?
Gil Brandt's the godfather, and he's only 84 years old. I'm 60. So I'm sort of the godson.
All right. We're with the godson. I think that's still a pretty respectable place to be. Obviously, Peter's MMQB article, it's your must read every Monday morning. Look, the first thing I need to ask, because sometimes we're up late here at PFF. We're grading games late night on Sunday, and you're just tweeting away at like 4 a.m. on a Sunday night. What does your Sunday night look like during the season but while you're writing MMQB?
Well, usually what happens is if the column is, and the column probably is typically about 8,000 words, sometimes a little longer during the season, but let's say it's 8,000 words. I try to get about 3,000 words done by noon on Sunday and sent to my editor. Luckily, my editor lives in California. He's in Long Beach, California, so he gets to live a fairly normal existence. He only has to work until about 3 a.m. his time on Monday morning. And so I try to get maybe 40 to 50% of it done before the games start. And then obviously I am going to have to do some editing or some fixing depending on the outcome of the games. But then, starting at about maybe 8 o'clock on Sunday night, I've got the game on in the background, and for the most part, I'm trying to bang away at that thing and trying to write about 5,000 words in 6 or 7 hours. And so that's pretty much how it goes. And I'm fortunate because over time, the first job I ever had in the business was with the Associated Press, and the premium with the AP is on writing intelligible sentences very fast.
Yeah.
So it's not about being brilliant. It's not about being Rick Riley or anything like that. It's just trying to be a communicator as fast as you can. And so, honestly, I don't recall the last time I've written a Sunday column or a Monday column rather that I would say, my God, that's some really good prose. I just, you just basically try to communicate what happened over the weekend in the NFL.
Man, that's a great strategy. You ever try that, Sam?
Yeah.
That's something you can implement.
I'm going to go for it.
I love it. Do you end up catching a nap on Monday morning? What does that look like if you're up all night? That 5,000 words in 6 to 7 hours?
I usually try to go to sleep until maybe about 10:30. I go to bed maybe at about 6. And it's hard for me to sleep during the day, even, when I try to make it as dark as I can. So I get up at 10 or 10:30. And then Monday is a big organized part of the day. At the MMQB, we have a staff meeting to discuss what we're going to do during the week at about 2 o'clock. And so, I got to be in there and do that. So it isn't really until Tuesday that I sort of get to veg out and to try to recover a bit.
So I'm curious, how did you first come across PFF? What's your background? Because I know you've got an old history with our founder, Neil Hornsby. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, a long time ago, I was aware of who Neil was because my brother, Ken, who worked for Whitbread Brewery over in England and lived in England from 1984 until he died a couple of years ago, So he worked with Neil's wife at Whitbread, and he used to tell me about this bloke who lived in Luton, in England, about an hour north of London. And he said, this guy's crazy about football. You ought to talk to him. You ought to meet him.
That's a fair description.
And one day he said, hey, Neil Hornsby is on the warpath. You had Jeremy Trueblood as one of your all-pro tackles. And he said, Jeremy Trueblood stinks. And, whatever. And so I think I got into a little bit of an email exchange, and I basically said, hey, for offensive linemen on my team, I hated to abdicate responsibility. But I said, I have some ideas, but in many cases, I rely on pro scouts, and pro scouts really like Jeremy Trueblood. And Neil said, well, they obviously weren't watching football this year. Trueblood was awful. He's my, 26th rated left tackle or whatever. I forget. I'm making that up. But it's, he was way down my list. And so I got to talk to Neil quite a bit about what he was doing. And I really thought almost from the beginning, once I found out exactly what he was doing, I started to have this feeling around 2005, 2006, 2007, and I forget, but it was probably a little more than 10 years ago, that this was genius. There was nobody, even for most teams, there wasn't anybody who even worked as a pro scout in the NFL who would have watched all 1,050 snaps of Jeremy Trueblood last year. He would have seen every one of the Tampa Bay Bucks games, but he would not have watched every player on every play. And I just thought, my God. And so I used to tell Neil, quite honestly, I don't remember exactly what I would tell him, but I would say things like, don't give up. This is great. This is something that isn't being done in the most popular sport in the United States. I mean, if you can hang on and somehow, some way make ends meet, I really think you got a chance to make something of this. And, he hung on. And then all of a sudden, teams started seeing how good this was, how valuable it was. And I always get a kick out of the people who say, oh, PFF sucks. They're just a bunch of guys throwing darts and all that stuff. They're not real pro scouts and everything. And I almost say to them, I've said this to one of my peers. I said, look, I don't want to burst your bubble on this, but honestly, if you or I or just some random football fan sat in for a few days and actually studied exactly, found out exactly how this was done, we could do this. Okay? There's no deep, dark secret to how this is done. It is just putting in an incredible amount of time and effort to see, for instance, did Von Miller, kill his guy on Sunday, or, how did his guy play Von Miller on Sunday? So I mean, again, I think it's just one of those things that over time I've really grown to appreciate what Pro Football Focus stands for, because it isn't to say that everything is right or that you guys don't make mistakes, but you have a hell of a lot better handle on what kind of year Richie Incognito had just had and how much his purported retirement, is going to hurt the Buffalo Bills, for instance, after already having lost Alex Wood and Cordy Glenn. So those are the kind of things that I've always looked to Pro Football Focus for, to especially to sort of analyze the positions that we don't have a great handle on analyzing.
Yeah, and we certainly appreciate not only the kind words, but you encouraging Neil. I mean, that's why you have a job, Sam.
Yeah.
It's thanks to Peter. for continuing to push Neil.
Not
push
Neil, thanks to Peter.
No,
That's the important thing.
But honestly, look, I meant this. I wasn't just saying this because he was a friend of my brother's. I meant it that this didn't exist. It's just like you guys now going into college football. It doesn't exist in college football.
Right.
And why doesn't it? You know, and so that's why, in my opinion, it's such a valuable service, because it allows people to make some sort of judgment, particularly like, you know, who had a better year at tackle last year, you know, or who had the best year at tackle last year. You know, I'm not saying that you guys absolutely unequivocally are the last word on that, but I am saying that it's a damn good starting point. It's a lot better than what we used to have, which was nothing.
Yeah, and the thing we keep saying is, you know, it's not just our grade; it's kind of all the other data that's going into it that, you know, helps you understand guys' roles and you know, what they might do going forward as well. So certainly more than just the overall grade. Definitely wanted to talk to you about the draft just a little bit, and you were telling us off air about something you guys are going to be doing as far as, is it just essentially duplicating what's going to happen in a war room? Because I do think we all put mock drafts out there and everybody yells at us at how bad our mock drafts are, and it's tough to handle all of that criticism sometimes, but I just want to scream from the rooftops, like, this thing could go any which way when it comes to the draft. Nobody has any clue, but how do teams prepare for that? It sounds like you guys are doing a pretty cool exercise to try to duplicate that.
Well, I mean, we were sitting around a couple of weeks ago, and I said, you know how teams actually do their draft prep? Part of it is they look at a whole bunch of mock drafts. Like Rick Gosselin in Dallas has always been really good. When Paul Zimmerman was doing it until 2008, when he suffered a series of strokes, people would look at his mock drafts. So they would always be reading all these different cities all over the country to make sure, like, they'd be reading the Cleveland Plain Dealer to find out, you know, what the Browns might be thinking right now and all that. But more than that, I think that every team now is asking its scouts and its front office people to be in touch with people who are ahead of them in the draft and just say, hey, what are you guys thinking? What can you tell me? And all that. And so most of the time, you know, the people in front of you are not going to tell you exactly what they're doing, but maybe you learn from the fact that, let's say that you find out, like this year, that, hey, the Atlanta Falcons have had private workouts with 4 tight ends. You know, so you say, wow, and they're picking 26. And you just say, okay, I'm going to plug in a tight end. I'm going to plug in the South Dakota State tight end here, you know, at 26 for them. Or I'm going to plug in Hayden Hurst, all right? You know, whatever. But you know, you just try to gain some information. So what I said is, why don't we do this? Let's have 4 different mock drafts this year, okay? And we'll do the top 12, because honestly, it is an absolute dartboard exercise if you're trying to figure out, let's say, the Ravens at 15 or wherever they are, who's going to be there for them to pick, you know?
Right.
So you know, you really are not going to be able to tell that. But it's realistic to say that, you know, let's try to figure out the little tributaries and the different ways that it could go in the top 12. You know, going down to Buffalo, because Buffalo obviously has the ammo to trade up to get a quarterback. Let's say Josh Rosen starts to do an Aaron Rodgers and starts slipping. You know, Buffalo could offer a ransom, say, at 6 to Indianapolis. Indy wouldn't mind moving down a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
And then they could move up there. But anyway, the only point I'm making is that teams look at all the alternatives. They don't just say, even if it's obvious that, let's say you think the Buffalo Bills or the Cleveland Browns at 1 are going to take Josh Allen. People don't say, okay, we'll put that in pen with the Cleveland Browns. No, they don't do that, because they understand that it could go 2 or 3 different ways. And so we tried to have this thing go a couple of ways with the first pick, and then a couple of ways after that with the second pick. so that after a while you end up with a couple of really weird iterations of the draft. One of them, we've got Josh Rosen going 11 to Miami. And so
interesting.
So this draft, because my whole point in doing it this way is that, in my opinion, this draft, because you've got two excellent poker players at the top of the draft, John Dorsey, who is just really not going to tell his wife what he's going to do before this draft, and Dave Gettleman, who's exactly the same with the Giants at number 2. You've got a couple of really, really good poker players sitting there at 1 and 2. And so we know that the Browns are going to take a quarterback at number 1. But I don't know, even going up right to draft day, that we're going to know which quarterback that is. So that's what we attempted to do in trying to put sort of the confusion this year and in many years, quite honestly, at the top of the draft. And more than the words of it, you're going to see how, me and Albert Greer did the top 12 of four different iterations, and we had fun with it because we're hearing a lot of different things up top.
So that's what I wanted. So first off, I love that exercise. I think that's fascinating, and I think the thing that fans can sometimes not understand too. Sometimes player value, isn't always shown in the draft. There are teams that would have loved to take a guy at 8, but there's just there's a better guy that they could pick at that point, and that guy drops to 30. And so
Right.
Player value, what teams want to do. There's so many different ways that this thing can land. But I guess that leads me to my next question, because they call it lying season. Is this lying season now, Peter? This is, you have a million sources around the league.
Always, you know what, Steve, everybody calls it lying season, and that has been, everybody just says that, but I can just tell you this. I'll never forget Sam White's, the first team I ever covered in the NFL was the Cincinnati Bengals. And Sam used to have this thing, that was back in 1984. Sam used to have this thing where he would ask people, like he coached Cincinnati and Tampa. And so when he would call around maybe to try to find out some draft information before the draft, he would say to people that he would talk to, hey, listen, if you can't tell me anything, that's fine. Just say, hey, Sam, I'd really rather not talk. But I just want to ask you this in good faith. If you can't tell me anything, don't tell me anything, but don't lie. And so that, to me, when I call around, I basically said, hey, listen, let's have this deal where if you feel like you can tell me something great, as long as you don't try to throw me off the path. And so I'm not sure I have a lot of people who have lied to me, like blatantly lied over the years. They might not have told me all the truth, certainly, but I think it's less lying and more sort of evasion and, evasiveness and just not telling you anything. Or here's a great example of what I'm telling you. So today I was talking to somebody who has a pick in the 20, and I said, so what are you thinking? And he goes, hey, we have so many needs right now that we could take right here that are sort of in our wheelhouse. And he named 3 positions. And he basically said, quite honestly, we absolutely unequivocally, I would bet we would take the best player left at one of those 3 positions. And he said, I can't tell you what that is because I don't know who's going to be there. And so I think that honestly helps me a lot, because now when I go to do a mock draft the week of the draft, I know exactly that I'm going to give this team the best available guy at the 3 positions that he said. That's it. And I'm not I used to be really, really hung up on the mock draft. Totally. I wanted to get as many right. One year, I think 2007, I got, I think 8 direct hits, and I beat Paul Zimmerman. I was walking on air for about 3 weeks. And so that, honestly, I don't do that anymore, just because I realize the utter hopelessness
Yes.
of the exercise.
Oh yeah.
And I'm just not going to kill myself over this anymore. I'm going to do the best I can, throw it out there, and then just let everybody laugh at me.
So I wanted to ask you, with the way this industry has gone, and Twitter, and this explosion of media coverage, and the NFL 24/7 everywhere, what's your take on this anonymous sources phenomenon? Like, you would have had sources that gave you information all the way through the years, but now it seems that we're just being bombarded with these takes from guys who are off the record that can be ludicrous. My favorite one was, I forget where the article was, but it was describing Sam Darnold, and it was an anonymous scout, and the description was simply loopy motion, bad face, overrated. I mean, there's some crazy stuff out there. What's your take on this whole anonymous source thing?
Well, I mean, I know how hard it is. If I call, like, for instance, let's say I get Chris Ballard of the Indianapolis Colts on the phone, or Dave Gettleman of the Giants, or John Dorsey of the Browns, and I get them on the phone like this week or next week. Okay, let's say I do. First of all, on the record, do you think there's any chance they're going to tell me anything other than he's a fine player?
No, of course.
No, they're not going to. And so therefore, at this time of year, I think it makes very little sense to try to talk to somebody on the record, because they're not going to tell you very much that's going to be helpful, unless you're talking about something that is not strategic related to the draft. Like if you say, hey, how do you think this draft compares in quarterback to, say, 1999 with Tim Couch, Achilles Smith, Donovan McNabb, or whatever, you know. But for the most part, I think in a larger sense, the question you asked, Sam, is a real interesting one that I talk about with people on my staff all the time. That let's be real careful about not over quoting people who we don't name. I know in some cases we're going to have to do that we're not going to be able to name the people, especially as we get close to the draft. But we shouldn't go using it as a total crutch. And so I use it, but I use it judiciously. And honestly, Sam, what I would much rather do is I would much rather say at the start of a column or at the start of things that, for the most part, most of the information in here is based on conversations that I've had, where I'm not going to quote people, but I'm going to use the information that I learn. And I don't mind admitting that, but I get turned off, like I'm sure a lot of readers do, if you read 10 anonymous quotes in a story and they don't quote anybody by name. Because then, if you do that over and over again, you're sort of asking for trouble. You're asking the reader to take a huge leap of faith to believe that everything you're writing is exactly out of the mouths of, these people around the NFL.
Yeah, I think that's the issue that we've been getting at. It seems like you can create a whole column based off a whole bunch of made-up quotes if you really wanted to.
And you're also treating it as if every voice in the NFL is worth the same, that they're all equal. You could be talking to, a random area scout versus a proven veteran, scouting director, and you're reporting essentially the same information or their takes with equal weight.
I quoted an NFL person, and I just can't go any farther than that. And I felt kind of bad about the way I worded this because I thought that his opinion was so valuable, and I trust this person's opinion as much as I trust anybody's opinion about offensive football in a front office or on the staff of any team in the NFL. And he was giving me his opinion about Josh Allen and how you're making a big mistake if you think Josh Allen is the second coming of Carson Wentz, just because he's a big, athletic, mid-sized school guy, from Wyoming versus Wentz at North Dakota State. And so I thought long and hard about whether I should use this guy as a quote or just sort of use his material. I ended up using it as a quote because it was so good. And he basically said anybody who's really comparing him to Carson Wentz is making a big mistake, and because they're just totally different players. And so those are decisions I have to make sometime. I'm not happy to leave it so kind of out there where you have no idea who I'm talking about, but I just wanted to get across my level of legitimacy that, hey, this is an opinion that really matters and that you should pay attention to. And again, it doesn't mean he's right.
Yeah.
I mean, Josh Allen might be twice the quarterback one day of Carson Wentz. How do we know? Nobody knows. But what I'm saying is that sometimes we in this position, I've been doing it for 34 years, I have to really make a value judgment about whether that I really want to use, is this quote good enough and valuable enough that if I shroud who it is it important enough for me to use? Sometimes I say it is, and sometimes I say it isn't.
No, it makes a lot of sense, and we appreciate that level of legitimacy that you've kept in the journalism profession. And that's a perfect segue to what we want to wrap it up with, because everybody's debating the quarterbacks. We obviously have our strong opinions on Baker Mayfield at the top of the draft. But, Peter, where are you right now? Who do you think's going to be the number one guy? Who would you take as the number one guy? Who's the first QB off the board? Most likely, of course, going to the Browns.
If I had to guess right now, my guess would be it'll be Josh Allen. But I think it could be Sam Darnold. And so I would guess Josh Allen because I think that the tools, I think there are some people with the Browns who, from what I'm hearing, are just in love with his tools, and he doesn't have to play right away. He can do a redshirt year like Carson Palmer did in 2003. And so I think there's that. And then I think you enter into an absolute degree of mystery, because I've had people tell me that Dave Gettleman is only going to take a sure thing at number 2. And so if he's only going to take a sure thing at number 2, he's probably going to take Barkley or Chubb, because there are going to be no quarterbacks who are sure things at 2. So, but watch. He'll take Sam Darnold with the second pick in the draft. So I think that is why a difficult time forecasting this particular draft, because the first 2 teams in this draft, I believe that the Browns could go 3 ways, probably in order: Allen, Darnold, or Mayfield. And then I believe that the Giants could go several ways. Probably Barkley, quarterback, Chubb, or trade for a huge treasure trove of picks. I mean, you have to ask yourself if you're the Giants. This is my big question right now if you're the Giants. Do we want to get a franchise back and just say, look, we kind of like Davis Webb. We really do like Davis Webb. And if we take one of these quarterbacks, it's out the window with Davis Webb, because you're not going to pick a quarterback at number 2 and have him not be your quarterback of the future. So hey, look, and this is a sidebar, but by far, the dumbest thing the New York Giants did last year, dumb, is not that whole thing with Eli and benching him for one game and all this stuff. The dumbest thing they did last year is not listen to Ben Mcadoo, and everybody will laugh at that. But Ben Mcadoo was the only adult in the room, because he said, listen, we got to see Davis Webb. We should see Geno for at least one game.
Right.
And, Ben Mcadoo was going to start Davis Webb minimum 2 games last year.
Makes sense.
And then they didn't get to see him at all. And it was a ridiculous waste of the last month of the season. But anyway, I'm told that Pat Shurmur is kind of fascinated by Davis Webb and likes him. Told me for my podcast a couple of weeks ago, he really does like Davis Webb. Now, he's not guaranteeing anything, not committing anything. But if you're the Giants, okay, take Saquon Barkley. Let Gettleman work on the offensive line post Nate Solder and really try to buttress that a little bit. And then you have a very good wide receiving core. You have Evan Engram, who's a very good weapon at tight end. And then you have the best running back to come in the draft in years. And all of a sudden you say, hey, maybe Eli's not as bad as he looked the last 2 years. So if you ask my gut feeling is if I had to pick one guy, I say the Giants take Barkley. And then after that, Jets take a quarterback, and we're off to the races.
Wow, I like it. And like you said, we might not even know who the Browns are really going to take until, draft night? Allen, Darnold, maybe a big surprise. So still a lot to figure out in these coming weeks. Peter, appreciate you coming on, taking the time. The godson of NFL media, thanks again. And
I'll take it.
Yeah, we'll do it again sometime. Thanks, Peter.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks a million.
Well, yeah, special thanks again to Peter King for taking the time out of his busy schedule. We really needed to get to the bottom of when he actually sleeps during the season. I think that was important. But I thought there was some really good insight as far as the draft goes, what the Browns might do, how he's really cultivating sources and not just throwing random stuff out there. I do appreciate that about him because there's a lot of crap out there right now.
There's a lot of crap out there right now. I'm just happy there are people other than PFF people that don't sleep during the season. It warms my heart to know that we're not the only people.
It's felt like a bonding experience for me because through the years, working at PFF, I do work to the wee hours of the morning, Sunday night, like, a lot of us do. And Twitter usually disappears a little bit. You always kind of have your eye on Twitter while you're grading games. And Peter King's like the only guy tweeting. And there's a couple random fans tweeting at him, and it's like, all right, he's up working, we're up working. It's great.
Peter King and the guys in different time zones,
Yeah, exactly. And
Australians or whatever.
West Coast people are the people just waking up.
Yeah.
Across the seas or whatever. Anything that's look, here's the one thing that stood out most about this entire thing. A lot of draft talk and all that, but the fact that Ben Mcadoo wanted to start Davis Webb last year. And it wasn't just that, let's slap Eli in the face and let's, end the streak. He actually had a plan for, hey, guys, we're going to be picking at the top of the draft next year. Eli's getting old. Let's see what we have in Davis Webb, and then maybe we'll draft a guy next year as well. That's a good long-term philosophy.
How much better would the decision-making process be with the Giants right now if they had had 2 or 3 games worth of tape of Davis Webb last season? It would have made everything easier. And the ridiculous thing is, at the point where they decided that this decision to sit Eli Manning down was so abhorrent, they had to reverse it, they had to can Ben Mcadoo, all this kind of stuff. At that point, putting him back in the lineup only made things worse. The damage has already been done. The start streak is over. He's been sat down. You can't repair that bridge. At that point, the only thing that made any sense was to put Davis Webb in and at least get something out of the fact that you've made this horrible, PR nightmare for you and damaged the relationship potentially with your franchise quarterback. They really did make a mess of that.
So, right. And look, I don't think the 2 to 3 games of Davis Webb was going to really swing things either way, but it couldn't hurt. Right? That's my whole deal with it.
Well, it could have given you 2 different pathways. At the moment, they don't really know, and you're working entirely off what you've seen from the guy in practice, which as a backup and as a third string backup for most of the time is going to be minimal snaps. You're really guessing. If you'd seen 2 or 3 games of him, maybe you get 3 games that look like Jimmy Garoppolo's games to start his career. And now suddenly you're thinking, well, okay, we can't be sure, but we've got a pretty good idea that this guy is good. Or you get 3 games that look like Nathan Peterman from the Buffalo Bills, and you go, well, maybe somewhere down the line he turn around, but you know what? I'm not even going to try.
But right now I'm drafting.
Number 2, we need to draft a quarterback. So, obviously the chances are they would fall somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, and you wouldn't have a much better idea of what you have now. But it could easily have sent you in either direction if you'd got the right few games out of Davis Webb. Either way, it was an opportunity that they missed.
I mean, I think the best case scenario is, how the NFL goes crazy for 2 to 3 game sample sizes sometimes, if he did have that 2 to 3 game sample size, and the NFL's going, now we're this guy that was a 3rd round pick or 4th round, we're gonna give you a second for him, and you actually have some trade value. I think that would have been great. The quote from a legitimate offensive source that essentially said, "Hey, I wouldn't go get Josh Allen." I think that's in line with what we're saying. I just tweeted out today. We always talk about quarterbacks being this binary yes or no, but I do want to expand that a little bit. It's not just binary. It really is just playing your odds. I mean, we're not saying Baker Mayfield's 100% slam dunk or that Josh Allen's a 0% chance of hitting. I mean, we just feel like the odds are better with Baker Mayfield and they're better than with Sam Darnold or Josh Rosen than they are with Josh Allen. But we keep using the path to success phrase. I mean, there's a path to success with all these guys. It's just a lower percentage chance.
Yeah, I think the binary thing is more about where you take them and how you position yourself about whether you need a quarterback or not. And you have Josh Allen typically at the top of the 2nd round, trying to illustrate that there's a huge amount of risk attached to him. My point is always that in this binary state, 2nd round quarterbacks don't exist really anymore. There's a couple of guys that sneak that far, but typically you either take a guy in the 1st round because you think there's a chance he can be an NFL starting quarterback or a star quarterback down the line, or you don't, and you take the next guy somewhere in the middle rounds because you don't think there's any real chance that he can pan out. But you're taking a guy on the off chance that you strike gold with a Tom Brady or a Dak Prescott or Russell Wilson, which, they come along, but if anybody had believed in those guys, they would have been taken in the 1st round.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the binary state. But we've made this point as well before. That's not to say that all the guys you're going to take in the 1st round are the same and they're interchangeable. And as long as you get one of those quarterbacks, you're fine. The chances of Baker Mayfield panning out, at least in our eyes, are dramatically better than the chances of a Mason Rudolph, a Lamar Jackson, a Josh Allen. I mean, it's still, we will spend the next few weeks until the draft banging the same drum with the Baker Mayfield, Josh Allen thing, but it does blow my mind continually that there is a good chunk of people with, inside sources, guys like Peter, who talk to NFL people who believe that Josh Allen will be the number 1 pick in the draft. And it just astounds me that you can watch his tape and the tape of everybody else and come to the conclusion that he is the best player in this draft.
I mean, and there's actually 2 things in his statements that completely go against, I think, what we would do at PFF, which is Josh Allen at 1, but also Barkley or Chubb being safe at 2. And when we talk about safe, we're talking about, you're going to get good players, but when you start to put values attached to it and running back value and then Bradley Chubb's value, is he truly this, slam dunk pass rusher? We had a source. Can I source drop?
Yeah.
Around the league?
Chubb in particular, I think, safe thing.
Well, we had a source drop comparison for Chubb from a production standpoint of Ryan Kerrigan of the Washington Redskins to us the other day, and it's like, all right, that's pretty good. I like Ryan Kerrigan. I would take Ryan Kerrigan probably in the top 10, but I would not take Ryan Kerrigan over, again, using percentages, over, say, a quarterback who has a 50, 60, 70% chance of becoming a top 15 quarterback in the NFL. Those are the things you're weighing, and if you're just going with the safe guy, like, hey, you could definitely have Ryan Kerrigan versus you could have a top 15 quarterback, you have to take the quarterback if you're sitting there with an aging Eli Manning if you're the Giants.
Yeah, those are 2 interesting names to pull out as safe draft picks, which has always been a crazy term because typically the guys that everyone has termed as safe draft picks have been among the most volatile and bust-worthy you can think of. Robert Gallery was the safest pick in that draft, and he was a disaster at left tackle.
My theory on the safe picks, because Aaron Curry's the other guy, he's safe. My theory on that is it was the positions that were like kind of pre-PFF where you couldn't quantify them all that well, and Robert Gallery would go out there and play left tackle for 10 years, and as long as he started games, it looked fine because you're not quantifying his performance. As long as a linebacker plays 16 games, he'll have 100 tackles, so he must be good. So that's where I feel like a lot of the safe stuff has come from.
Yeah, I mean, it was seen for years that the tackles were these safe draft picks until there was a slew of disastrous tackles, and then suddenly I think people started to reassess. You know what, maybe these guys aren't that safe because there's a fairly striking bust rate in the last few seasons. But, I mean, if you're looking at safest picks in this draft, there's only one name, right? It's got to be Quentin Nelson. He's the one guy that everybody thinks is a star.
But it still comes down to this whole.
I'm not saying he's valuable, but
right. But it goes to position. But again, you're weighing like the fact that I think go into percentages. Let's say he has an 85% chance of being a very good player or better. And then you just weigh what is that worth, though? And that's where the value stuff comes in. It is like playing the stock market a little bit and having, some higher risk deals and going with the positional value, the quarterbacks and the pass rushers and the coverage guys.
So let's isolate it just to quarterbacks for a minute. We think that Baker Mayfield is head and shoulders the best quarterback in this draft class. How safe a pick do you think Baker Mayfield is? Let's forget the attitude thing for a minute, because that's
right.
That's kind of unquantifiable for other people that talk to sources, etc.
Right.
For you and me, just in terms of what we've seen on the field, how safe is Baker Mayfield?
So I've always joked that the best players are the safest. The people that we're going to put at the top of our draft board. So in recent years, Myles Garrett is an edge rusher. Joey Bosa has been up there. These guys that are at the top of our draft board, Jalen Ramsey has been up there. They're the safest players, right? There's a reason why you're putting them up there. They might also have a high ceiling, but those things can also live together. I think Mayfield's really, I don't know, do I have to put a percentage on it?
No, well, yes.
He's really safe.
No, do it. Yeah.
75%
75% safe.
75% safe.
I mean,
Darnold's 65% safe. Rosen's 50% safe. No, but here's the thing, and the other thing that I tweeted out earlier today. Let's pretend for a minute, we mentioned this on the other podcast, it was the 2004 draft class. You have Phillip Rivers, you have Ben Roethlisberger, you have Eli Manning. You have all of those three guys, and it's not just, Phillip Rivers throw for throw and Ben Roethlisberger throw for throw have been the best, and then Eli Manning's been a step below those guys. But Eli Manning had a couple seasons where he was better than Big Ben or Phillip Rivers. Rivers has had a few disastrous seasons in there. Big Ben has had a few disastrous seasons in there. So it's not this like draft a quarterback, he'll just continue to get better, linear growth, profit. It's not always like that. So with Mayfield, Darnold, and Rosen, I could absolutely see something where for a few years Mayfield's the best guy, a few years Darnold's the best guy, and then in maybe 2 years out of their career, Rosen's the best guy, and he's really, really good. So it's not just this linear, this guy's always better, but it's like, how many really good seasons do you want? How much consistency do you want? There's so many different things that come into this whole deal.
I think to me, though, one of the most interesting things is we're all talking, or everybody looks at quarterbacks through this lens of what could they become? What's their ceiling? How good can this player be if everything comes together, if you manage to find the assembly instructions for a Josh Allen and unpackage all those components and create a top quarterback.
Best analogy all draft season, by the way.
The IKEA quarterback.
Yes.
Yeah. But the thing that gets me is, so everyone's looking at this Baker Mayfield, what he could become. Maybe if we ignore the flaws in the Oklahoma offense and the defenses in the Big 12, all this kind of stuff, what could he be? I think just looking at it from the other way of the safety, the floor, how bad or what are the chances are this guy isn't a good quarterback. He's the safest among all these guys. Like, even if everyone acknowledges, I think, that his ceiling is pretty high. It's a case of what are the chances that he's going to bust as well. And everyone seems to think all these other guys have this higher floor. Mayfield, to me, is the safest of these guys. Like, even if you don't think that he could be as good as some of these other guys, if everybody puts it together and everybody realizes 100% of their potential, I don't get the idea that he's not the safest. He does everything well. There's no real major flaws to his game. Even if he doesn't get any better or he doesn't realize this stellar potential, he's better than all these guys.
Is that where we've seen some Jeff Garcia comparisons for him? So if he ended up as Jeff Garcia,
where did we get that? Somebody said the comparison was like Jeff Garcia plus, Jeff Garcia,
right.
A better Jeff Garcia, which actually is not a terrible comp for Baker Mayfield.
But Garcia he was a good player, but that actually might be his floor, and his ceiling could be, I know I've compared Darnold to Rivers before, but maybe production-wise it could be a Phillip Rivers type of career, which is a top 10 quarterback, and if we think his floor is Jeff Garcia, that is a pretty safe quarterback there. All right, so we got Baker Mayfield is safe. We're just doing a little draft philosophizing, plenty of days to do that, even more. We'll have a little bit more on the podcast next week. Special thanks again to Peter King for taking time out of his busy schedule to enlighten us on some of the stuff he's hearing about the draft. Don't forget to get to ProFootballFocus.com. Get yourself a PFF Edge or PFF Elite. It is exactly what you need for draft season and beyond. Thanks again. We'll talk again next time.